इसमें की क्रीम या
Oh, should mention, your powers are going to start kicking in right about now.
Welcome back, everyone. It's Charlie. The Supergirl movie just came out in theaters. This will be my breakdown of the deleted post-credit scene, a lot of the big Easter eggs from the movie, how it's connected to the Man of Tomorrow movie, where it fits in the DC timeline. There is a lot to unpack, so if you're brand new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to get all the videos. No surprise, there was a lot of super family stuff going on in this movie because of Man of Tomorrow coming next, but I was surprised we didn't see more Green Lantern and Lantern stuff because technically that's coming way before Man of Tomorrow. She spent so much time traveling across space, I would have expected a couple more Green Lantern references on some of the places that she went to. There are a lot of people that were surprised to see when the movie ended there was no actual post-credit scene, but the joke is that they filmed one for the movie and just decided to move it to a different part of the movie. So the post-credit scene is in the movie, just not where you would expect it to normally be. Originally, it was actually that final scene of Supergirl coming back to Earth and going with Krypto to Superman's very, very tiny apartment. It looked even smaller in this movie than it did during the first Superman movie, where she started to work through some of her trauma and she's ready to be active, be present on Earth, and Superman is just really happy that she's come back and chosen to continue living on Earth because he was worried throughout the movie that she wasn't really finding her people, she wasn't fitting in the way that he wanted her to fit in, so he was like the concerned big brother, even though they're technically cousins, just really wanting things to work out for her on Earth and for her to fit in and love Earth the way that he grew up loving Earth, the way that he does in present day, and be the superhero that he wanted her to become. During their conversation, he also says, I could have used your help with the last guy. I believe he's talking about the events of the first Superman movie because she wasn't around during those because she was off celebrating her birthday week, getting drunk, and picked up Krypto after the events of those movies and just continued on her intergalactic pub crawl. There are a lot of people that were confused about that line too. He wasn't talking about Brainiac because James Gunn already confirmed that she's going to team up with Superman during the events of the Superman Man of Tomorrow movie, and that's set after the events of this Supergirl movie. So the idea is that she's come back to Earth with Krypto right before Man of Tomorrow picks up. Brainiac eventually shows up, and she's just a critical part of their team up against Brainiac. Presumably, they're not enough together to defeat Brainiac, like they need Lex Luthor's help too, and that's like where the real Man of Tomorrow comes in. Lex Luthor is meant to be the reference in Man of Tomorrow. He is the Man of Tomorrow, but it's also a slight reference to Superman too, because that's also one of his names in the comics. Superman is the Man of Tomorrow, but there's a bit of a twist in making it more about Lex Luthor. They also have the joke about Krypto getting into the chocolate in Superman's cupboard, so also noted Superman likes chocolate. Maybe they were Chocos, which are like the DCU version of Oreos based on the comics. They're a very big in-universe brand in the DCU and were heavily featured during the events of the first Superman movie and a big Martian Manhunter Easter egg, so I think that eventually James Gunn is going to introduce Martian Manhunter, maybe in Man of Tomorrow. And another big Easter egg from the end of the original Woman of Tomorrow comic book that they used to adapt for the actual movie, even though the movie is very different from the original comic, there are some beats that are similar. There's the whole idea of Ruthie's sword that she promises to whoever helps her kill Krem. Supergirl uses the sword to kill Krem at the end of the movie, and in the comics, she keeps the sword with her, like Ruthie gives it to her as a gift. Right as the movie was about to be released in theaters, just like a couple days before it came out, James Gunn released this picture that Tom King had posted of Wonder Woman holding her sword with Supergirl holding her sword from that story, making it seem like James Gunn was trying to imply that Supergirl would show up in the next Wonder Woman movie when he introduces his version of Wonder Woman in the DCU. One of the other big DC producers said that they know which DCU movie is happening after the Man of Tomorrow movie, they just haven't announced it yet. It could wind up being the next Wonder Woman movie. The person who James Gunn hired to write that next Wonder Woman movie is also the same person who wrote the Supergirl movie too. There are all kinds of rumors about Wonder Woman showing up in the Man of Tomorrow movie, some sort of cameo scene. We will see what happens with her in the next couple of years, just because it seems like James Gunn is about to introduce a couple of the other big A-list Justice League members. There are probably going to be a lot of think pieces about what might have gone wrong with this movie because it just did not work out the way people expected from a follow-up to James Gunn's Superman. It feels like the director Craig Gillespie was trying to make his version of a James Gunn movie, but it wasn't that successful. So if you want to lay most of the blame, supposedly the script for this movie was actually really good, but because 25 minutes of the movie was cut out before they released it, I wouldn't be surprised if there's a better movie in that 25 minutes that's missing. Also, a lot of the end of the movie ending in such like a bland looking kind of Quantum Mania type of way feels like the blame lies on the director for choosing to set their final action set piece on that really bland looking environment planet. Also, James Gunn for probably trying to be hands-off and letting the director do what he wanted to do, and not like stepping in and saying, no, let's not do it this way. Let's make it look more like the comic, which looked way better. At the beginning of the movie, she's already on her spaceship on her intergalactic pub crawl for her birthday week. They never explain where she got her spaceship from, but Superman has fought aliens coming to Earth before. The Green Lantern Corps is similar to what it's like in the comics, so she's very familiar with many alien species across the universe. So in the brief few years she's been on Earth, maybe like 2 years, she's traveled off-world around the universe a lot. So presumably, Superman helped her buy the spaceship secondhand off of some other alien. But like her record player, all of her music, her iPod, her movies were probably given to her by Superman too. Like the iPod was probably Superman's iPod when he was younger because he would have grown up in the early 2000s because of the age and when the DCU is taking place in present day. Like iPods were still a thing during the early 2000s. You also probably noticed her headphones look similar to Star-Lord's headphones from his Walkman, which feels more like a James Gunn Easter egg than a Guardians of the Galaxy Marvel Easter egg. Even though James Gunn didn't write or direct this movie, it did kind of feel like Craig Gillespie, the director, was trying to do his version of a James Gunn movie, like a James Gunn light movie. She never lived with the Danvers family, but they did confirm that her legal Earth name that she's using is Kara Danvers, so that is canon to the DCU now. And there was no Helen Slater cameo in the movie that I could spot, which felt like a missed opportunity, but she did play the Arrowverse version of the Melissa Supergirl's Earth mother, Mrs. Danvers, with her Earth father being played by Dean Cain. As far as I could tell, the biggest cameo in this movie, if you want to call it that, would be like Seth Rogen playing the tiny little bus driver alien, because I wouldn't really consider Jason Momoa to be a cameo scene, like he was a full-on guest star role. These are much closer looks at the newspaper articles that Crypto pees on, which they mostly use for a joke. Presumably, they're set before the events of the first Superman movie because she wasn't around during the events in that movie, and these are just like random adventures that they have before that first Superman movie. Superman saves town from nuclear reactor explosion feels like a reference to the first Christopher Reeve Superman movie when he saves the Earth by spinning it backwards, reversing time, and stops the reactors from exploding when the Earth starts to break apart. Romita Lake Campaign feels like a reference to either John Romita Sr. or John Romita Jr., both of which did Superman comics and DC comics in the past, and Marvel comics as well too. James Gunn puts a lot of comic book artists in his movies in general. There were a ton of Easter eggs for comic book artists in the first Superman movie. There'll probably be a ton more during Man of Tomorrow. But the real joke here is more about Superman's big save and Supergirl's very small-time ground-level save, saving cats from a sewer. Like, Superman is doing these big heroic things, and Supergirl is barely doing anything at all. Which also feels like a joke on Superman saving cats from trees, which he did in the classic comics and in the Christopher Reeve Superman movie, but the idea in that movie is that he was happy to do it like Superman loved saving cats from trees for little kids. But Supergirl here in the movie is giving off vibes like she doesn't even want to be here in this save. She feels like she's just joke posing for the picture, like, oh, okay, let's get this over with.
Bye, Frisky. Come on now.
And speaking of Christopher Reeve Superman, they reused the John Williams Superman theme song during this. They used it heavily in that first Superman movie too. We see her Supergirl suit folded up in her ship. Later in the movie, we actually see Superman giving it to her in the Fortress of Solitude for the first time, explaining why it looks the way it does, why it's so bright, so that people know we're good, which is also meant to dovetail with what her mother told her on Argo City before she died. No matter what you do, be a good person. It is currently her birthday week. She's turning 23 this year. In the movie, she also says she's about 10 years younger than Superman, give or take. So James Gunn does change her origin story a little bit in this movie. In the movie, they explain she was born 9 years after the destruction of Krypton. Superman was born on the day the Krypton was destroyed, which he also references later during the old post-credit scene that is now like the end of the movie, where he says, birthdays are also kind of tricky for me because he was born on the day that his entire race was killed. We also see this literally happening in the movie too. As the dome is going over Argo City, you see this pod shooting off of Krypton. That's meant to be Superman's pod leaving the planet as they're doming the city. Here's the thing with their ages though. In the first Superman movie, James Gunn said that Superman is supposed to be in his late 20s, like vague late 20s, but the timeline doesn't quite work out if Kara is saying she's turning 23, and this is like right after the events of the first Superman movie. So like, we'll say Superman is close to being 9 years older than her, but relative physics, space travel, like how long it took her pod to get to Earth, they're a little bit closer in age than she actually says. But the idea is still she's biologically a number of years younger than him, if it wasn't clear. You spot the milk bones for Krypto. Also, Milkbone, the brand in real life, paid a ton of money to be in the movie. They also had a big integration in the first Superman movie too, like James Gunn sold a bunch of space in the movie to Milkbone in a bunch of other brands. It's one of the ways that a lot of big movies, not just DC movies, but Marvel movies, all other huge big studio $200 million movies, make their money back even if their box office isn't as big as they want it to be. So it's one of the ways that studios still make money on movies that might bomb in box offices. It is an absolutely bizarre but totally real fact about the way movies are made nowadays. Superman then starts leaving her a string of intergalactic Zoom calls in the movie. She misses the first one, and he's using the Fortress of Solitude and Kryptonian technology to make the call to her spaceship. If you're thinking about the timeline of when this takes place relative to the first Superman movie and the Man of Tomorrow movie, which is happening later, presumably Superman is calling her here before that Hammer of Baravia fight, before things get real and the events of the first Superman movie pick up. So at the moment, things aren't that dire for him. He's just wondering when she's coming back because he's worried about her like a big brother would be, even though technically he's her cousin. We start to see her on a bunch of different planets. There are only a couple in the movie. There were 9 in the original Woman of Tomorrow comic book that they adapted some of this movie from, but they heavily changed that original comic book, and I do think that the comic book is actually better than the movie. So if you want a really cool Supergirl story, just read that original Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow comic book. Predictably, her hangover cure is yellow suns, which juices her powers back up, causing her body to heal damage very quickly. Makes sense. They also use this to foreshadow the events later in the movie, where this happens a number of times to her.
Okay, this does not look like this is gonna end well for you guys.
Some of her outfits she's wearing, like the jacket, is from the original Woman of Tomorrow comic book, but like the band t-shirt, the sunglasses are not. I believe that's a Blondie t-shirt she's wearing, and they use the Call Me song for pretty much all the trailers. The whole joke about Krypto putting her tool in the toilet while she's down in the hatch trying to fix things feels like both a Star Wars reference and another joke about Krypto just being a handful and misbehaving all the time. We also see his origin in the movie too. He was a Kryptonian dog living in Argo City when Krypton was destroyed, whose owner also died of kryptonite poisoning, and he was abandoned, just living as a stray on the streets. And after her father Zor-El bubbled the city and saved most of its inhabitants, sent him in the pod with Supergirl to Earth. So part of the idea, if it wasn't clear, is that Krypto is meant to be this traumatized dog, like he grew up with a lot of trauma, the same way that Supergirl grew up with a lot of trauma too. Krypto in the DCU, though, was actually modeled after James Gunn's real-life dog, Uzo, who he rescued. Like, he was a rescue dog who was very mistreated growing up, and James Gunn had to sort of, like, wean him back, get him used to being around other humans, and it took him a long time, too. Basically, the way he explained is that Krypto is his dog if his dog had superpowers. James Gunn is a huge dog person, which is why Krypto has become such a big character in the DCU movies, and will probably continue to be a big character going forward. This is also why you see a lot of tie-ins and integrations with real-world dog adoption agencies for the movies. Like when the movies come out, there'll be like a trailer that's dedicated just to dog adoptions. The movie she's watching with Krypto on her spaceship is Casablanca, big classic, while she eats cereal with him, which is kind of gross. Do not do that. Even if you love your dog a lot, their mouths are full of all kinds of germs. Do not eat stuff with them. Do not share stuff with them like this. Superman has also probably taught her all about Earth movies and TV shows. Maybe we'll find out what her favorites are eventually at some point. We see Krem and the space pirates for the first time arriving on Ruthie's world to steal all of her father's ultra-strong swords, which we never hear what metal they're made from, but they're supposed to be some of the best in the universe. So I took this to be a comp to like Uru metal in the Marvel universe. Like all the Asgardians' weapons and Mjolnir, Thor's hammer, Stormbreaker are made from that kind of metal. This is one of the very big changes in the comics. They heavily changed the Krem character and the Space Pirates characters and their whole motivation, Ruthie's motivation. Her planet had a different name originally. Holzer is a reference to Brittany Holzer, who was the editor, one of like the workers on the real-life movie. There are a couple of big examples of this across the movie where things are named after real-life people. The Bilky planet later that the pirates control is also named after Bilquis, the original artist on the Woman of Tomorrow comic book, which was way better looking than this movie looked. I don't know how this movie turned into like this gray slop by the end of the film, where the comic book looks so bright and beautiful. When they visit other planets, they also show categories that read what the color of the planet is. Like it says solar category red to remind casual viewers where she has powers and where she does not have powers, just because it's kind of confusing and the movie jumps across a couple different types of planets. This is also how she gets her ears pierced. There were a lot of questions about this. James Gunn also implies that she might even have a tattoo that she got under a red sun as well. Krem gets a lot of changes from the original comic book. In the original comic book, he's a king's man who works for like the local king ruling the area where Ruthie's family grows up on this planet and just randomly kills her father for no particular reason. Like it's a very senseless killing, and Ruthie spends the entire story trying to avenge her father. Originally, he only killed her father, not her mother, and she didn't have a brother in the comic book. So, like, she still has family living in the comic when she goes back to her farm at the end of the story. In the movie, Krem and the Space Pirates kill all of her family.
At best, she'll end up kidnapped. At worst, she'll screw it up for the both of us and, oh, I've got to save my dog.
They also invented the whole special weapons subplot too. In the comics, her father was just like a casual farmer. He wasn't like some special secret weapons maker or anything like that. There was about 25 minutes that they cut out of the movie towards the very end of the editing process, and one of these like big subplots that got cut out were a lot of scenes for Krem's backstory, and in the context of the movie, they were going to show how he faced an upbringing of child abuse, and he believed it made him stronger. So that was like the whole survival of the fittest thing that he had going on in the movie, where he threatened eventually in the movie to make Ruthie his wife following his pattern of abuse that he grew up with, which was also meant to play into the whole trafficking subplot that the pirates had in the movie, where they were rounding up women to help continue their all-male society of space pirates, which was not a thing in the original comics. In the comics, Krem is just a loner who joins up with the space pirates, worried that Supergirl is going to kill him. The movie didn't really make it clear how long the space pirates had been rounding up women, creating this all-male society, but Krem seems like he's in his late 30s or 40s, so it had been at least like 10, 15 years, maybe a little bit more. This scene of the alien stealing her sword at the bar after she tries to hire someone to kill Krem is from the comics, but it goes down a little bit differently. When Kara says, "Not my monkeys, not my circus," that also feels like a reference back to the original Superman movie where Lex Luthor was keeping the monkeys to run his Twitter troll farm in his pocket dimension. You have to imagine Superman told her about the monkeys. There were these monkeys running this entire troll farm against me, yelling about me on social media. Turns out it was just a whole bunch of creatures that Lex Luthor was controlling. It was all him. He was behind it all. She gets another Zoom call from Superman the next day. When he says he wants her to find her people on Earth, make friends, they'll probably pay that off with her making friends with the new Wonder Woman eventually, Hawkgirl, maybe other big characters we see showing up in future movies when she crosses over with and teams up with them. Like James Gunn has said that he plans on making her a really big part of the DCU in general, so we'll see which other movies beyond Man of Tomorrow she also shows up in. Like they've been implying that she might show up in the new Wonder Woman movie too. This whole scene of Krem stealing her ship and shooting Crypto with the poison arrow is from the comics, but it goes down slightly differently. The same basic energy is there in the comics. The really big change is how the Crypto poison arc plays out. In the movie, they play it totally straight. He really is about to die. He absolutely needs the antidote to live, and if she hadn't found Krem, he would have died. As a lot of people pointed out, this also mirrors the first Superman movie, which was basically a save the dog kind of arc. Like it was a John Wick Superman, John Wick Supergirl kind of arc. In the original Woman of Tomorrow comic book, Krypto was never in any real danger. It's a complete red herring. She lies to Ruthie about needing to find Krem to get the antidote because she just wants to help Ruthie deal with the grief of losing her parents because she's slowly dealt with the grief of losing Krypton and her family too. So in the comic, she never really needed to find Krem, she never needed the actual antidote because Krypto was always going to be fine. Like his own Kryptonian DNA biology helped him heal the poison damage relatively quickly after they left him on that planet. So when they came back in the comic, Krypto was totally fine, like no antidote needed. They probably changed that in the movie because casual audiences who weren't familiar with the comic would have gotten pissed off if the whole Krypto subplot was just a big fake out like it was in the comics. We see her Kryptonian watch that her father gave her before she escaped in her pod. We'll see if there's any other hidden things that this watch does in future movies too. Like it's not just a watch, there's other stuff hidden inside here.
He has 3 days.
You cannot give up on me.
We get our first real big cameo scene in the movie when the tiny bus driver is played by Seth Rogen. He actually had many more scenes, a much bigger part in the movie than I actually expected, and he didn't show up in the end credits. I did not spot his name in the credits for some reason. She also calls English the common tongue, like basic in the Star Wars universe. A lot of aliens speak different languages that they didn't subtitle in the movie. This entire bus action scene with the tech pirates is not from the original comic book, but she does have a bus fight scene in the original comic that just goes down very differently. I was kind of bummed because the original comic book version was a little bit cooler. In the original comic book version of this fight, because they're not near a yellow sun yet, she uses red kryptonite to power herself up, and because it's red kryptonite, it gives her all kinds of abilities that she doesn't normally have, the way that different colors of kryptonite affect Superman and Supergirl differently. My assumption is they did this just because James Gunn didn't want to overly complicate things by getting into the concept of the different colored forms of kryptonite yet before they did that in the Superman movies with his character. Like they haven't done different colors of kryptonite yet in the DCU. Then they travel to a space station that is basically like the DCU equivalent of an intergalactic 7-Eleven, full of a bunch of different knickknacks and spacesuits. There's like a golden spacesuit and a couple of spacesuits here that seem familiar, but I didn't get great looks at them, so you can let me know if you think you spotted any Easter eggs for other big characters here. Then they travel to the Bilquis planet, like I said, named after the original Bilquis artist, the Woman of Tomorrow comic book. The whole trafficking subplot, like I said, was also not a thing in the original comics. My assumption is they added this just to make Krem seem like a more despicable person than he was in the comics. In the original comics, he was kind of a dink villain, like he was a terrible, terrible villain, but they did that by design. It was meant to be a big red herring. Like Supergirl never needed any help to actually kill him. She could have done it at any time that she wanted to, but it was more about helping Ruthie deal with her grief. So even though it's really easy to make fun of terrible villains in movies, like it is bad to have a terrible villain in a movie that just doesn't work, in the original comic, he was actually kind of written to be a terrible villain. Supergirl tells Ruthie more about Superman. She thinks he's a big dork, and when she says he believes in the good of everyone, but she sees the truth, it's a reference to his catchphrase, truth, justice in the American way, which DC later amended to get rid of the American part because they wanted Superman to represent in like a whole international audience. Like he cares about the entire Earth, not just about American values. They make a reference to Superwoman from the comics, which is kind of funny. In the comics, Superwoman was originally Lois Lane, who just dreamt that she had the powers of Superman, but later comics eventually gave her actual powers, like Superman found a way to actually give her powers briefly. I do not think that James Gunn is ever going to give his live-action Lois Lane superpowers, though, but there have been other women in the comics that use the Superwoman name. They go to the space bar on this planet. I did think it was weird that this ultra-remote bar on a dying, almost uninhabited world was so familiar with classic songs from Earth. That just felt like a weird thing that took me out of the movie a little bit. Maybe somebody from Earth at some point visited the planet recently, or they got the songs from some Green Lantern that visited. There were a lot of needle drops in the movie that just did not work for me, particularly like the last big needle drop during the final fight scene, just absolutely terrible needle drop. They use this bar scene to introduce Jason Momoa's Lobo, and Supergirl is very familiar with him when he shows up. This is because Jason Momoa said his Lobo had fought Superman in the past of the DCU, and Superman had probably told Supergirl all about Lobo. When she says he killed off his entire planet and has a god complex, this is from his comic book origin. Lobo is a Zarnian. His name in Spanish means wolf, yes, but in his native language, it means he who devours your entrails and thoroughly enjoys it. After he's born, he uses a scorpion-like creature to kill off his entire race, and he is capable of regenerating his entire body from a single drop of blood. Even though they don't really get into his powers in this movie, I was kind of disappointed by that. A lot of times, this causes him to accidentally grow a ton of clones of himself, like anytime he sheds blood, boom, whole bunch of Lobo clones pop up. When this happens, though, usually he just kills off all of his duplicates. That's why you don't have like millions of versions of Lobo running around. He also has incredible strength and durability. He's capable of going toe-to-toe with Superman for a while when Superman does not hold his punches, but Superman is more powerful than Lobo. And Jason Momoa did say that he wanted to do a rated R Lobo movie in the future of the DCU and cross over more with Superman, like have actual fights with Superman in the future. But like I said, in the context of like the history of the DCU so far, he has already encountered and fought Superman. We just haven't seen it. Usually he's seen riding around on his space bike acting as a bounty hunter, one of the best bounty hunters in the universe. And he doesn't need a spacesuit to survive his trips through space, so when he flies off on a Space Hawk into space at the end of the movie, he just goes off to collect his bounty on the space pirate. During the movie, the whole reason why he's on this planet is because he's come on a bounty for a space pirate, causing him to help Supergirl in a very reluctant kind of way. He's more of a chaotic force than Supergirl's able to use to her advantage than he is somebody who actively wanted to help her. You could kind of look at him as an anti-hero the way that Jason Momoa portrays him here, but stories typically use him as a Superman villain or like a villain in general that you want to root for. He's chaotic neutral, kind of like a Harley Quinn character, but with way more powers. There's also a long story of Jason Momoa trying to become Lobo. He was a huge fan of him growing up. He collected all of his comics when he was a little kid. Then when Zack Snyder cast him as Aquaman for the DCEU, he actually said he thought he was auditioning for Lobo. Like he actually went to a Batman audition knowing that he wouldn't get Batman. Like they're not going to pick me as Batman. But then when Zack Snyder called him and said, "Congratulations, you got the part," he thought it was for Lobo. And Zack Snyder had to explain to him, "No, Lobo doesn't exist in our DCEU." So when they rebooted everything, when James Gunn was hired to be the new Kevin Feige, one of the first texts that he made was with Jason Momoa, who basically yelled at him saying, "You told me that I could play Lobo, like Lobo, man." And James Gunn's reply was that he had told Jason Momoa he would make a great Lobo long before he was actually chosen as like the new person to run DC. So it kind of seems like it was always Jason Momoa's destiny to play Lobo, and things just worked out, like the cards just worked out in his favor. But it just feels like he was born to play the character. Like he's way more like a Lobo type of character than he ever was Aquaman. Even though I did enjoy him as Aquaman, it just felt weird to see him as Aquaman and not Lobo. Even though he flies off at the end of the movie, and he doesn't do a lot during this movie other than just like briefly help Supergirl out, they do have big plans for him in the future of the DCU. Supergirl then gives Ruthie a big explainer on Krypton's destruction and her origin story, and we get a bunch more Kryptonian and Superman lore during this part of the film. We get a much better look at Krypton than we ever have before in the DCU. Hopefully we'll visit this more in flashbacks in other future movies like Man of Tomorrow. For the most part, it seems like the Krypton backstory is more like the Christopher Reeve Superman movie, where the Kryptonians were kind of climate change deniers and overconfident in their ability to handle the instability of the core and didn't listen to Jor-El's warnings. Maybe they'll also clarify this in the Man of Tomorrow movie and say Brainiac also had something to do with this or caused Krypton's destruction somehow. David Krumholtz plays Zor-El, her father, and he is the brother of Jor-El, Bradley Cooper's character, Superman's father. They're both Kryptonian scientists and had different plans to deal with Krypton's destruction. Jor-El only creates Superman's pod and sends him to Earth to be a conqueror, which they also clarify in this movie too, Jor-El's whole message. Zor-El literally says his brother intended for his son Kal-El, Superman, to be a god and rule Earth, turning it into a new Krypton, having all kinds of wives. And Zor-El initially didn't intend on sending Supergirl though too, because she hadn't been born yet, and he didn't eventually want her to be a conqueror either.
Dude, you got a secret harem?
When Krypton is in the middle of being destroyed, Allura Inze, her mother, was not yet pregnant with her, even though they knew that they would try to have a baby at some point, and Zor-El's plan to survive was to erect a shield around a portion of Argo City, not the entire city, and save as many people as possible during that hunk of Argo City into a life raft. It also kind of feels like they're using this to sort of foreshadow potential Bottle City of Kandor references in Man of Tomorrow, if they do Bottle City of Kandor and Brainiac has it on his ship. You also probably noticed during the movie, when he domes the city, a bunch of people are killed in collateral damage, so RIP to all those people, but they were gonna die anyway. Krypton was in the middle of breaking apart, so like a bunch of people were gonna die no matter what. Kara is then born 9 years later after they'd been floating in space for a long time, and they explained the actual destruction of Krypton unearthed kryptonite deep in the planet's core and was present all over this hunk of Argo City that everybody was trapped on. So everybody started slowly succumbing to kryptonite poisoning and dying over time. Kara was then forced to watch all of them. She then finds Krypto on the day of her mother's funeral, and soon after Zor-El finds Jor-El's schematics for Superman's pod, creates another one for Kara and Krypto. Presumably there wasn't enough material to put a whole bunch of other people onto. There was only enough material for like one pod. Sends her to Earth to save her life, knowing that she'll also have her cousin Superman there to help her, and they can carry on Krypton's legacy together. I also kind of wonder what was in the pack that he made for her too, like what other Kryptonian things are in her little suitcase there. But her father was not down with the same conquering Earth subplot, like didn't want her to have a ton of husbands and be like a Kryptonian baby factory or anything like that. When she says the gods are not that kind, she's talking about the Kryptonian gods. Ra was just one of them that gets referenced a lot in the comics. Lobo comes back and tries to capture the space pirate, and they have a big fight scene. There are a couple pastiche references from him. That's his catchphrase in the comics too, which is basically him like yelling curse words at other people. We also find out that Krem can teleport through dimensions, which feels like a very powerful ability. Maybe they'll clarify this during Man of Tomorrow, like they're just setting up the idea that people can do this. They kind of do that during the original Man of Steel Zack Snyder era too, with the whole Phantom Zone too. Peacemaker had the key that opened the multiverse doors. That is also a big subplot during the Man of Tomorrow movie and during the Peacemaker series. So there's a lot of dimension hopping that James Gunn has opened up inside the DCU. Kind of makes me wonder if Brainiac wants that key so that he can conquer the entire multiverse if he doesn't already come from another universe when we see him. Really feels like something that Brainiac would want. Supergirl makes a Squidward SpongeBob reference, so SpongeBob exists in the DCU. And when they go to the Green Sun planet, the Kryptonite Sun planet, it's from the original comic book, and the lore is that Superman's villains had created a green sun as a way to trap him and kill him, like the planet was meant to be his prison that Supergirl just inadvertently winds up in on her way to find Krem. We get another flashback to her meeting Superman for the first time when her pod crashes on Earth. He said he'd been tracking her using the fortress for the last month, and presumably the reason why he doesn't speak Kryptonian yet, why he hasn't learned the language yet, is because the robots had not taught him yet, and he probably only knows a few words at this point. So my assumption is that Supergirl will just now be the one to help him learn Kryptonian now that she's starting to adjust and deal with her trauma and be more present as a hero on Earth. Like she'll be around more. So I would think it would just make more sense on a narrative level if she just helps him learn Kryptonian by speaking more Kryptonian with him and talking about Kryptonian society, because she grew up for several years as a Kryptonian, like she lived with other Kryptonians, so she knows way more about their society than Superman ever knew. Everything he knows about Krypton and his parents are just from the tapes from his pod. We also see her apartment on Earth in Metropolis is line of sight with the Daily Planet, probably so Superman can also keep an eye on her and make sure that she's okay, although he would have also introduced her to the Kents, so they probably treat her like family too. During the final fight, Krem also used kryptonite against her in the comics, but in the movie he uses way more of it against her in the arrows instead of just like a kryptonite ring. In the DCU, it would make more sense there'd be a ton of kryptonite around the universe that people had acquired over time, although James Gunn explained in the first Superman movie, on Earth, Superman had already recovered and destroyed all traces of kryptonite, but that was just on Earth, not all around the universe. So as a lot of people will point out, Lex Luthor will probably eventually get his hands on some kryptonite. He'd have to get it from off-world or from someone else, which he probably will eventually because he's building the war suit for Man of Tomorrow. So it makes sense that he would just evolve that war suit over time and he gains some more kryptonite weapons to fight Superman. When she flies out of the lake, that's a reference to the 1984 Helen Slater Supergirl movie. No Helen Slater cameo in the movie, like I said, didn't spot her, but maybe she was one of those 25 minutes worth of deleted scenes. We get a real brief scene of Lobo giving her the hell yeah as she kills Krem, meant to show that he respects her more now, and maybe they'll pay this off in some future movie if they meet again. He then takes off to collect the bounty on the head of the space pirate that he captured. Then at the end of the movie, Ruthie doesn't have her sword anymore, so I think the idea is that she gave it to Supergirl. She kept the sword in the original comic book too, so like that's just part of Supergirl's belongings. There's also a picture that James Gunn tweeted out of her holding that sword next to Wonder Woman holding her sword that Tom King had posted, making it seem like maybe we'll see this show up again in a future movie at some point when Supergirl teams up with Wonder Woman, but we'll see about that. They then finish celebrating her birthday because the week isn't over yet before she goes back to Earth. Then I already explained the end of the movie, which was the old post-credit scene. It's like the post-credit scene just moved to a different part of the movie where Superman basically says, I'm so happy that you finally decided to come back and live here, but I could have used your help on the last one, which is probably the events of the first Superman movie. The last guy was probably Lex Luthor. But part of the idea, as James Gunn and the other producers said at the Supergirl premiere, is that she'd already been filming scenes for the Man of Tomorrow movie with Superman, and they would have some cool team-ups in Man of Tomorrow, but presumably they won't be enough together in the Justice Society to stop Brainiac, and that's why they need Lex Luthor's help. And it'll also heavily involve the Sanctuary Planet and the multiverse door that they got from Peacemaker. Everybody post all your reactions in the comments below, and if you think you spotted any references in the movie that I didn't talk about in the video, just write them below in the comments. There's going to be a bunch of big stuff coming up. They're about halfway done filming the Man of Tomorrow movie. We'll probably get the first teaser trailer by the end of the year on the same schedule when they were releasing Superman trailers for the first Superman movie. So just expect more footage from that over the rest of the year. Of course, we'll do videos about it as we get more and more Batman 2 trailer videos probably towards the end of the year as well. Wouldn't be surprised if they released that first Matt Reeves Batman 2 teaser at the end of the year. I've already done a bunch of big videos about both of those movies. Click here and here for the teasers that they've already released for all of those. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.